Terrific. Well, welcome to you all. And can compliance to competitiveness really be the title of a session on procurement? And I was puzzling over this as I was thinking about the session. Is there a competitive advantage in procurement? And if so, how do we find it? Now, Unilever has probably one of the most distinguished histories in thinking about procurement, and you've thought a lot about sustainability of procurement. I know from having followed the company over the years. Corina, let me start with you. As the Chief Procurement Officer, this is obviously your bread and butter. How do you find advantage as opposed to compliance, that is doing what is required and making sure that you don't get on the wrong side of regulation? Is there really advantage to be had here? Is there any sustainable advantage to be had here?
Now, great question. Thank you very much. So I'm responsible for personal care procurement, so Chief Procurement Officer but for personal care, but I'm also responsible for climate procurement in the company. As you probably know, we have massive and very ambitious targets in our company for both Scope 1 and 2, as well as Scope 3, both for, short-term targets validated by SBTi by 2030, as well as obviously the net zero target like everybody else, right, in 2039 for us in Unilever. What is important for us in terms of the procurement, let's say, contribution, if procurement is not at the table, things are not really moving in the right direction. We are collaborating very closely with our colleagues and our, teams in sustainability, supply chain, and R&D. But procurement has a massive role to play in this space. And you talk about, compliance versus competitiveness. I would like to say that, compliance is paving the way to transparency. And then what you do with this transparency is driving competitiveness. So from a procurement perspective, we take significant actions in the company together with our supply chain colleagues and, of course, with our partners in suppliers, to build, the right actions moving forward in the climate space. Yeah.
Can you make it concrete for us? Because there are often trade-offs in the real world, as you know, because there's pressure on cost competitiveness, and there's obviously speed to market, and so on. So I'm sure your colleagues in other divisions want emphasis on those. And yet you also have a sustainability mandate when you think about this. So how do you handle the trade-offs? Maybe give us an example of how you handled one successfully.
Yeah, so, procurement has managed until now, cost and risk. Now we manage carbon as well.
Right.
So we do have climate clauses in our contracts. We take sourcing decisions looking into the carbon cost structure. Mm-hmm. We do have a supplier climate program, which we are leading together with our supplier partners. But we also have great examples, as you just mentioned. So in Scope 1 and 2, Unilever oleochemicals in Indonesia is a massive emitter of greenhouse gases. We are working together with supplier partners, KIS Sustainability. This is one of our partners in Indonesia, and we are the first one buying biomethane for this massive operation. And this is done in collaboration with the mills, palm oil mills. Mm-hmm. We are using the waste from the palm oil, and together with this supplier partner, we take this waste, we use the waste, and they trap the waste and the carbon, and then we reuse it as a biomethane. And this is proving extremely efficient, cost efficient, as well as, from a climate perspective, delivering significant results. This is just one of the examples, but, I'm sure that all the companies are doing the same, trying to find the best balance between cost as well as delivering against the climate program. Never easy, but if you don't start and if you don't drive this program, you will never get there.
Yeah, and then you touch, obviously, palm oil is a hot button issue, so that's an interesting example of trying to find an innovative way to procure differently that connects with maybe some of the principles of circularity as well. Colin, let's come to you. Can you talk about some interesting innovative structures that companies might be looking at, demand aggregation, or are you finding new ways of thinking about procurement that go beyond the silo of one company, one procurement officer, that might be providing leverage in trying to achieve more sustainability?
Oh, great question, Vijay. And maybe just a quick word of introduction for those who don't know ACT.
Sure.
We provide scopes 1, 2, and 3 solutions for corporate clients. So whether that is renewable power, biomethane, voluntary carbon compliance carbon, biofuel tickets for road, marine, aviation, and agricultural certificates. So that's our core business. We also do some primary project development and energy efficiency, carbon projects like cook stoves and reforestation, and low carbon agricultural commodities. But perhaps most relevant for this conversation is we're invested in Scope 3 supply chain solutions with digital offerings that make it easy to first engage, for the corporate to engage their suppliers. And you probably find that engaging the first 10 or 100 large ones is just about manageable, but what about the last 5,000, right? So there you need digital solutions that can help you engage them and then help them the suppliers themselves, to account, activity-based carbon accounting, because if you use a spend-based method, it can be up to 5 times wrong. Think about a expensive law firm versus a cheap one. It's still one lawyer, but it's the same amount of carbon, whether it's 5 times the price or not, right? So just as an example. And then for these smaller suppliers, it's often difficult to take action. And I think what's most important is getting from measurement to action. And if you're too small, you can't come to a company like ours and trade with us for renewable power, for example. So we built a digital marketplace, literally click to buy. And it's just to make it simple for particularly smaller suppliers to act. Now, to your question, we deal with a lot of blue chip corporates, and we see very, very, very different approaches. Some who use our supply chain solutions say, "Oh, we'd really like you, please, to do the carbon accounting and to buy some renewable power. We'd like you a lot more if you did that." Guess what happens? Not a lot.
Right.
Right. And then there's ones that take a step further and say, well, in our scoring in the procurement tenders, one of the categories is carbon, and if you do better there, then you'll get a better score, and that'll influence our decision making. And maybe that gets you a little further. But it's hard to activate suppliers, and typically that doesn't even get you terribly far, right? We have others that will provide some subsidies, right? But then that's out of your pocket straight to the supplier.
Yeah.
How far can you take that in a competitive world?
The subsidies is a pretty stark way to put it, but there are larger companies that provide access to financing at preferential terms, maybe through banks that want to support. I mean, I know Walmart does this, has done for a long time. There's knowledge sharing. Oftentimes, smaller companies don't have the ability. There's a lot of friction in learning best practice. Presumably, you can help with that. But are you finding those methods have borne fruit over the years, or is it, the hard economics of the supply chain are really difficult to encounter, to challenge?
Ultimately, you need the whole supply ecosystem to evolve, right? And I think there are some industries like semiconductors and pharma that have clubbed together and are trying to influence and work with the whole supply ecosystem. And I think that's a very good way of collaborating, and it's in everybody's interest to decarbonize collectively, right?
And because it's pre-competitive, it doesn't fall foul of antitrust rules and so on. Am I right?
Correct. But we've seen everything. We've also got one major client who's buying renewable power on behalf of their suppliers. It's a private company, so not subject to public market pressure.
Right.
But they say, you know what, we're just going to do that because that'll be the cheapest solution rather than them buying it piecemeal at small volume, right? And then we have one, it's Microsoft, who just says, you know what, you don't do this, you're not a Microsoft supplier.
Yeah.
But then you have to have the power.
And I mean, again, the power of one of the wealthiest companies on earth. Just a week and a half ago, I was in Dublin visiting one of the largest data centers in Europe, which is a Microsoft facility. And they announced at that time that they had achieved 100% renewable energy to cover all of their data center energy needs globally. Now, the U.S., this has been true through not just for them, but for Google and the others, using power purchase agreements. Europe was a little bit harder, but that was achieved. But generally in Asia, it's not that easy to do because of the coal intensity of a lot of the grids in that area. But through, again, under creative agreements, they've been able to procure enough renewable energy to match the energy.
We're structuring 24/7 renewable power supply in Japan, China, all through Southeast.
But it takes effort, and it has to. It goes well beyond compliance. There's no law that says they need to do this. So, and that sort of gets, maybe this is a good moment to come to you, Colin. Can you, sorry, Steve, the UN Global Compact, of course, looks beyond the interest of any one company. You really try to take a broader frame. What is the way to mobilize laggards in any industry? There's always a long tail. I mean, there's exceptions, leaders in that example. It's some of the big tech companies. But in many industries, you often have a few branded companies like Unilever in your sector, but I'm sure you have smaller competitors whose names are not as well known. They're less likely to be boycotted, for example. Maybe local brands or others who typically may not have the resources, but also may not have the incentives or motivation to be as good actors in procurement. How do you bring them along under a broader umbrella, like you try to think about at the Global Compact?
So, Global Compact is a UN-backed corporate sustainability initiative. As you noted, 25,000 companies participating globally. Here in the UK, we have 950 companies in our network at all points on the journey, many just getting started on this. But I think we're talking about sustainable supply chains in isolation, and it rarely works that we're going to make our supply chain sustainable is the starting point. So the first step is the company needs to recognize the value of sustainability to their strategy, their business plan. I think that's key. And then once a company like Unilever, a great example of this, that has baked sustainability into the brand in a really strong way, having done so, then the starting point would be supply chain, because that's where, for just about every company, the bulk of emissions sit, the bulk of exposure to human rights abuses sits. So first is that commitment to being a sustainable company for all of the reasons that there would be for that. And easy things like being more competitive in the market for talent, having a compelling sustainability story around your brand is going to bring in better talent, which is going to make your company more profitable in the longer run. So I think the examples of sustainable businesses being maybe it's fading slightly, but I think still generally preferred by investors, by consumers, by employees, by regulators. There's a strong business case for being a sustainable company. And so therefore, it ensues that there's a strong business case for sustainable supply chains. But I think it's a matter of time that these laggards are going to...
And laggard is a harsh word. So if we frame it differently, small and medium enterprises, for example, it's not that they don't have an aspiration or they're not good, corporate citizens, but they may lack the resources or they may lack the know-how to keep up with the big boys. What can you do? Is it something that a rising tide that could lift all boats in that?
Climate change is bound by the laws of physics, but a business case is a human construct. So Microsoft is creating a business case for its suppliers by saying, do you want to do business with us?
Right.
This is what you have to do. And now those suppliers can do the maths and decide whether the cost of solar panels on the roof makes sense in light of wanting to keep Microsoft as a client.
Yeah.
That's a story that's playing out. We have a program, our Sustainable Suppliers training program that we do in collaboration with our country network in France and Spain, in which we get larger companies to pay a modest fee, but then they can invite as many of their small SME suppliers as they would like to participate in the program. And it's a gentle nudge. It's a way for the company to say, this is the journey that we're going on.
Right.
We would like to take you with us. Start thinking about these.
You start having ecosystem effects when you do it in that way.
It's sending that signal that we're not going to drop you next year. But in 3 years,
Right.
we want to see some progress. It's about giving fair notice, being transparent about where they're going,
Right.
starting to build those systems of to allow for transparency so that there are reasonable, realistic, manageable platforms for transparency for SMEs, so that that it works for everyone, and it's bringing them on the journey. So I think it always comes down to a business case.
Right.
And for the larger company, that may be built around resilience, managing transition risks, all sorts of risk management and opportunity in having a more sustainable supply chain. For the suppliers, well, the business case can be quite clear. It's keeping this customer, but also the cases usually can be made in efficiencies, in, again, being able to attract talent. It's going to pay off in contracts with other suppliers. There's a business case there,
Yeah.
but it just needs to be crafted to the unique conditions of any given relationship.
Before I come to you, I want to see if I can procure some questions from this audience here. Please put some thoughts into Slido, and we'll come to you in just a moment. Let's get your intervention, and then we'll bring a microphone out here to the front row. Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the Microsoft suppliers who was forced to do this came back to us and said, "Thank you, this is fantastic." So now we always wanted to do something about sustainability, but we didn't know how. Now we've done it. Now there's something else I can talk about with my potential clients.
Right.
So I actually have a differentiator, and that's good for me. So that was a small supplier that was enabled to go further. And then the other way around, I think as a procurement person, often the companies that are lowest carbon are better run. They're better partners, right, for the longer term. So I think good sustainability is good business.
Once you make an investment in better processes, and it might require some cost of transition, less waste, more efficiency, companies tend to be better run that are have paid attention to these
Just
issues.
a quick one point, just to build on this. It's also about how we, as a big company, are supporting our supplier development in this space and supplier capability development. So you can be harsh and tough, but you can also be there to support, right? And to build a program together, right?
Absolutely. Let's get a microphone here to the front row, please.
I'm Jane Firth from Vegetarian Express. I used to work for a very large company. I now work for a medium-sized company.
Hold the microphone a bit closer.
Sorry. Jane Firth from Vegetarian Express. I used to work for a very large company, and I now work for a medium-sized company. And so the difference in investment is quite clear. But it feels to me as though the affordability of that finance is a massive hurdle for a lot of businesses to be able to make that initial investment, to be able to do something more sustainable. So as long as you have the guys at the top of the chain who have the money who can pass it down, that's great. When you don't, because, for example, I work in the hospitality loop, there's less money in the trade these days because people aren't going out to eat so much. So where does that initial investment come from? That's kind of the big question, I think, for a lot of supply chains.
Yeah, it picks up on the point I made about SMEs. Anyone want to take this? Where do you find the resources when you're not a large entity, or you're not lucky enough to be in the slipstream of a large entity?
Maybe I can start. I think the first thing you do in sustainability is often making you money, right? It's saving energy. And maybe it takes a little bit of investment, but you get it back relatively quickly. And I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, right? If you take the first step, you find that opens up more doors, and you get more business, and you get stickier business. And I think it's that as we look towards 2030, a lot of people made commitments, and it becomes more or less a compliance, an obligation, right, rather than a voluntary measure anymore. And then it's a matter of engaging ahead of that cliff that people are facing to invest in and prepare for that.
Yeah. But it's not easy. I appreciate the challenge you identify. We have a question there in the middle of the pack. If we can get a microphone to the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you. Elias Westerdahl from the Center for Synchronous Leadership. Do we have any good examples of cross-sector collaboration? So say whether it's all law firms coming together or all retail firms coming together or a subset of them coming together to move the needle?
Good question.
I'm sure there are lots of collaborations in different industries. I think we need to do even more. Frankly, we have a massive role to play on the industry collaboration, because sometimes, if you think about it, the big corporations or any corporations go back to the suppliers asking for PCFs, product carbon footprints. Everybody is asking for something, so we overwhelm the system if we really don't collaborate and work together. So that's point number one. Point number two is also about how do we build the ecosystem, and how do we really look into supporting breakthrough technologies of the future? Because sometimes we have the tendency of thinking about today, tomorrow, and 2030, but we need to work today for 2030 as well as for 2039 or 2050. So working together and collaborating cross-industry is extremely important, and we should do more. So that's clear.
Any other positive examples of collaboration? That's
Colin mentioned pharma, but and you mentioned the antitrust risks, and they can't dismiss that too quickly. Companies getting together to talk about procurement,
right?
It's very, very sensitive.
Yeah.
So even where these collaborations are happening, they're not likely to be shouting from the rooftops about it. It's going to be a little more quiet. But platforms like, there are many platforms, but like Global Compact, we work more across sectors, but within that cross-sector grouping, there will be clusters from anyone that will be working in the same direction to try and shift. It's always a challenge that, even for a huge company like Unilever, you may not control a dominating percentage of a factory's production. And so even, for any one company to go in and start making demands can be really challenging. So coming, collectively is always going to be more effective.
And, just in the small amount of time remaining, any example of what not to do, of a failure, something that didn't work out, or something that seemed like a good idea, but hasn't yet succeeded? Anyone want to share something from your experience?
We had it was a private roundtable, so I can't name names, but they certainly talked about rushing. So, suppliers need lead times. They have their own budgets. They have to generate, this point about raising capital to make investments, that takes time. So any sort of shifts in expectations on suppliers need time to work through. It's a question of fairness, but also just practicality. To get the outcomes that you want, they need to be set up to succeed.
Maybe one point from my side is more about making assumptions instead of really engaging properly with the partners and supplier base to really understand the data and have the transparency. So taking assumptions maybe doesn't really work properly in this space, and you need to really have the right data and then to take the right actions.
I've seen that as well. And let me just add one more. Regulatory U-turns do not help.
Expand on that a little bit.
So Europe wants to have CSRD rolled out, and then they roll it back. So people start to do work, and then it's wasted.
Right.
And then we have some changes in Washington and views on what's important and not in sustainability.
Yeah, we're certainly in an age of regulatory uncertainty, right?
Yes, we are.
As with much else, uncertain. But one thing seems certain, that the people who work in procurement have job security. I think you're certainly will not be at a loss for work. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. We're just out of time, so give them a nice round of applause.
Thank you.
We wish you the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.